Stepmom forced me to confess crimes I never committed to graduation reveal left everyone shocked and my life in ruins. I can still hear her voice echoing in my head. Say it, Joshua, admit what you did, or I'll ruin you. That was the moment everything cracked, the moment my stepmother, Sarah, forced me into a confession that would shatter my life. I was 26, sitting in the living room at my father's house, the smell of gasoline drifting in from the garage where Kenneth had been working on his car. My whole body shook as Sarah paced like a predator, circling me, her phone already recording. Let me rewind. People always ask, how did it start? The truth is it didn't begin with shouting. It started with small, almost invisible cuts to my sense of safety. A text here, an email there, things I didn't remember writing, but apparently it came from me. When I was younger, Sarah was just Dad's second wife. She married him when I was 13. At first, she played the cool stepmom. She bought pizza on Fridays, asked about my favourite bands, even joked about being my big sister. But under that sweetness, something darker lived. I remember the family photo on the mantle. It was from Christmas 2008. I was in college then. Kenneth was barely 10. We're all smiling, even Sarah, though her smile never reached her eyes. Years later, I'd stare at that same photo and wonder how many secrets were already being woven behind my back. During my college years, I started noticing weird emails linked to my account. Professors got messages supposedly from me, asking for extensions I never requested. Friends got passive-aggressive notes signed with my name. Back then, I brushed it off, maybe a hacker, maybe spam. I never suspected it was Sarah. But at the holiday gathering that changed everything, the mask came off. Dinner had just ended, roast turkey, mashed potatoes, but most of us were too full to touch the leftover Chinese food in the fridge. I was sitting by the fire, trying to keep conversation light, when Sarah leaned in close and whispered, "How's your little secret?" My stomach dropped. "What secret?" I asked. Her smile was razor sharp. "Don't play dumb, we both know." She wouldn't say what exactly. That was her tactic, keeping it vague, so my brain spun out, trying to guess what she meant. And then came the first real red flag. She showed me screenshots. Conversations, supposedly from me, where I threatened people, stolen money, admitted to things I'd never even thought of. They were all fabricated, but terrifyingly real. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, voice trembling. "Because," she said, tapping her nails against the phone screen, "I can make this public, unless you're ready to cooperate." I felt sick. The heat of the fire on my face suddenly felt suffocating. Kenneth walked in from the garage at that exact moment, his clothes smelling of gasoline. He saw my pale face in front, but Sarah smiled and said, "Nothing, just a family talk." That night, lying awake in my old room, insomnia wrapped around me like barbed wire. I kept replaying her words. "Admit it or I'll ruin you." What would she ruin me with? And why me? I thought maybe it was just some twisted power game. The next day, the first domino fell. My bank called. My $15,000 wedding fund money I'd saved for years was gone. Transferred to an account I didn't recognize, but somehow linked to my identity. I called Sarah in a panic. "Hello, Joshua," she said, her voice smooth, almost sympathetic. "Maybe you should be more careful with your passwords." That's when my chest tightened. My heart pounded so fast I thought I was having a heart attack. I didn't know it then, but it was my first full-blown panic attack. I tried to confide in Dad, but he brushed it off. "Sarah wouldn't do that," he said, shaking his head. "You've always had trouble managing money." I felt betrayed, silenced. Alone. The final nail in part 1? A week later, Sarah sent me a video. Footage of me, in my bedroom, talking on the phone late at night. Private. Recorded without my knowledge. My blood went cold. Her message said only, "Confess, or I'll send this everywhere." That was the first time I truly understood I wasn't safe. Not in my home, not with my family, not even inside my own identity. And it was only the beginning. The morning after Sarah sent me that video, I sat in rush hour traffic gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every honk, every brake light, every impatient driver around me felt like an extension of the pressure in my chest. My mind kept replaying that grainy footage of me on the phone. The way the camera angle suggested it had been hidden in my room for months, maybe years. "Confess, or I'll send this everywhere." That line wasn't just a threat, it was a sentence. I started imagining my coworkers seeing it, my friends, even strangers online. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. By the time I got to work, I was already drenched in sweat, heart racing like I'd run a marathon. Looking back, the red flags had been there long before the holiday gathering. During my college years, I remember Sarah helping me fill out FAFSA forms. At the time, I thought she was being supportive. She insisted on knowing all my passwords just in case. I was naive, grateful even. Only years later would I realize she'd been collecting pieces of me like puzzle parts, planning how to weaponize them. Kenneth, my younger brother, had always been the golden child. Not by his choice, Sarah groomed him to depend on her approval. He tried to warn me once, quietly, when we were alone in the garage. "She's not who you think," he whispered, wiping grease from his hands. The smell of gasoline clung to him. "She watches everything." I didn't push him. At the time, I thought he was just being paranoid. But that warning came back to haunt me. Things escalated after the wedding fund vanished. I went to our family lawyer, a man named Robert I'd trusted since childhood. He'd handled Dad's divorce, the house, even my small college savings account. Sitting in his office, I laid out everything, the stolen money, the fake emails, the threatening video. He nodded gravely, scribbling notes. "Don't worry, Joshua, we'll get to the bottom of this." For a few weeks, I believed him, until I started noticing details that didn't add up. He knew things I hadn't told him, specifics only Sarah and I had discussed in private. When I confronted him, he brushed it off with a nervous chuckle. "Must have slipped out in conversation," he said. But I knew. He was feeding her my every move. At the same time, the cyber harassment intensified. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m. with anonymous messages. "We know where you live. You'll pay for what you've done." Photos of my car parked outside my apartment. Even my therapy sessions weren't safe. My therapist once got an email from me cancelling appointments I hadn't cancelled. I started unravelling. Chronic insomnia set in. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with pounding heartbeats and the memory of Sarah's whisper, "Admit it." When I did sleep, nightmares dragged me back into rooms where cameras hid in every corner. Socially, the walls closed in two. One afternoon, I went to the grocery store near my apartment. I was standing at the register when the click a girl I vaguely recognised from high school froze. You're that guy, right? From the news," she said, voice hushed but loaded. My stomach dropped. Sarah's smear campaign had reached headlines. Local outlets ran fake stories about identity theft investigations with my name attached. People whispered in line. I could feel their eyes burning into the back of my neck. I left the groceries behind and walked out, hands trembling. The only lifeline I had was my best friend, Erin. We'd been close since freshman year of college, the kind of friend who shows up at 2 a.m. with greasy burgers and no judgment. One night, after another round of threatening emails, I called him, my voice breaking. "She's destroying me," I whispered. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." He didn't hesitate. "Pack a bag, you're staying with me." For a while, Erin's small apartment became my safe haven. He cooked leftover Chinese food with me, listened without flinching when I confessed how broken I felt, and never once questioned my sanity. "You're not crazy, Josh," he told me. "They're making you think you are, that's the point." That sentence stuck with me. Still, paranoid gnawed at my brain. I started checking every vent, every light fixture for hidden cameras. I unplugged appliances taped over webcams. I didn't trust anyone, not my father, not the lawyer, not even myself sometimes. Sarah had twisted reality so thoroughly that I questioned every memory, every thought. But the worst moment of part 2. It was when I logged into my work email one morning and saw a draft sitting in my outbox. I hadn't written it, but it was addressed to my boss, accusing me of stealing funds from the company. And it was timestamped at 3:14 a.m. while I was asleep. That's when I realized they weren't just framing me. They were setting me up for complete destruction. And someone else had to be helping her. The morning after I found that fake draft email in my outbox, something inside me snapped. I drove to work in silence, rush hour traffic stretching out like a slow-moving nightmare. Every car horn felt like a warning. My palms were slick on the wheel, my heart beating so hard I thought people in other lanes could hear it. At my desk, I opened my laptop with shaking hands. There it was again, another email I hadn't written, this time already sent to HR. It accused me of misusing company credit cards. Attached was a PDF of evidence with my name on it, all forged. I remember leaning back in my chair, staring at the screen as my vision blurred. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a full-blown identity hijacking. And whoever was doing this at Sarah, or whoever was behind her, was smarter and faster than me. I shut the laptop and went outside for air. The smell of gasoline from a nearby construction site hit me and brought me back to the garage at Dad's house. Kenneth's warning, she watches everything. That night, I went back to my father's house not to see him, but to dig. Kenneth was in the garage again, tinkering with his car. "You need to tell me everything," I said. My voice cracked, not from anger but exhaustion. He glanced at the door, lowered his voice. "She's been doing this for years," he whispered. "She's got cameras everywhere, even in my room. She made me give her your passwords when you were in college." I felt like I'd been punched. You helped her." "I didn't have a choice," Kenneth said, eyes wet. "She said she'd ruin me too." In that moment, my anger at him dissolved into something worse, a kind of grief. He was just another pawn. 2 days later, Erin came with me to confront the family lawyer, Robert. We walked into his office at 8:15 a.m. sharp. "Why are you feeding her information about me?" I asked. Robert looked up from his papers, his face pale. "Joshua, I know you're working with her," I said. My voice was steady now. I'd hit the point where fear burned off and left only cold clarity. "I have the emails." He stammered. "You don't understand. She's not alone." Erin leaned forward. "Then who else is involved?" Robert's eyes darted to the door like he expected someone to burst in. "She's part of something bigger. People pay her for information. She's been selling identities for years. Judges, lawyers, kids from wealthy families. She records everything. Blackmail, extortion." The room went silent. My stomach turned. This wasn't just Sarah playing a twisted family game. This was a network. Once the shock wore off, panic took its place. I started having nightmares so vivid I woke up screaming, Sarah standing over my bed, holding my phone, whispering my passwords. I developed chronic insomnia, staying awake until 4 or 5 a.m. just to avoid the dreams. My therapist called it hypervigilance, a trauma response. "You're living in a state of constant threat," she told me during a session at 3 p.m. on April 19, 2022. "Your brain is rewired. It's trying to protect you, but it's also exhausting you." I tried medication. I tried grounding exercises. But the panic attacks kept coming. In the grocery store. In my car. Once, in the middle of a work meeting. My world had shrunk to a series of safe and unsafe zones, and even the safe ones were vanishing. The public fallout was relentless. People whispered when I walked by. A neighbour posted on Nextdoor about the criminal living on their street to me. One morning, a stranger at a gas station recognised me from the news. "Aren't you that guy who stole all that money?" he said, shaking his head like I disappointed him personally. I couldn't even defend myself. My voice cracked, my chest seized up, and I just got in my car and drove away. The breaking point came when I found a hidden camera in my apartment. It was disguised as a smoke detector above my bed. Erin discovered it while helping me clean. She's still watching you, he said, his face pale. I stared up at the little red light blinking. My hand shook so badly I dropped the ladder. This never ends, I whispered. But something shifted in me that day. I realized hiding wasn't working. Waiting wasn't working. If I wanted my life back, I had to fight. I started gathering every shred of evidence. Screenshots, timestamps, forged documents. Erin helped me back up everything on encrypted drives. Kenneth agreed to testify if it came to that. And then I planned my counterattack at the one place Sarah wouldn't expect me to strike. My college graduation ceremony. It was only weeks away. And I had a plan to reveal everything. May 14, 2022. My college graduation. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the quad. Families crowded the benches, cameras flashing, kids running between their parents' legs. I was supposed to feel proud, accomplished, free. Instead, I felt like a soldier about to storm a battlefield. I had rehearsed everything in my head for weeks. The evidence, the timeline, the screenshots, the proof that Sarah and Robert weren't just malicious, they were part of a criminal network. Kenneth had agreed to sit quietly in the audience, ready to corroborate my story if needed. Erin had hidden a spare USB drive in my gown, just in case. As I walked across the stage, shaking from adrenaline and panic, I could see my parents in the front row. Dad smiled faintly, oblivious. Sarah's expression was unreadable, her lips a thin line. I could feel her eyes drilling into me, calculating, predatory. When they handed me the diploma, I paused. My hands were trembling. The microphone felt heavy in my grip. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. Before I move on to the next chapter of my life, I said, voice surprisingly steady despite the storm inside me, I need to share something important, something that's been going on for years, and no one in this room knows the full truth. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered. Sarah's eyes narrowed. For as long as I can remember, my life has been controlled and manipulated by someone I should have been able to trust, my stepmother. Sarah, she coerced me into doing things I never did, recorded private moments without my knowledge, and used them to terrorize me. Gasps rippled through the audience. My father's hand twitched. Kenneth sat frozen, his face pale but supportive. I want you to know I have proof, emails, videos, forged documents, even my family lawyer was complicit, sharing confidential information, and it doesn't stop there. She was part of a larger criminal network controlling identities, manipulating lives, and blackmailing anyone who stood in her way. I saw a few people in the crowd whisper frantically into their phones. Sarah's face turned red, then pale, as realization hit. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I held up the USB drive. Everything is here. You can't hide behind lies anymore. The audience gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God." My father's chair scraped against the ground as he stood up, shaking. Sarah finally found her voice, but it sounded small, fragile. "Joshua, this isn't true." "It's all true," I said firmly. "You turned my strengths into weaknesses, stole my money, destroyed my reputation, and made me question my very sanity, but I'm done being your victim." People were recording. Phones pointed at her, at me, at the family that had seemed so perfect. Whispers of disbelief and shock filled the air. A few professors were nodding, acknowledging the evidence I presented. Then, a twist I hadn't even anticipated, one of Sarah's associates tried to storm the stage. Security tackled him. Someone had been watching me for months, but this time, I was ready. After the chaos, I walked off the stage with my diploma in hand. My body was shaking from the adrenaline, tears streaming down my face. I felt fear, relief, anger, and a strange surge of empowerment all at once. I had reclaimed my narrative, exposed the lies, and refused to let them define me. Kenneth came up behind me and whispered, "You did it, Josh. You finally did it." Erin grinned and gave me a tight hug. "Told you we'd get through it." Even in the aftermath, though, the trauma lingered. People looked at me differently, some with sympathy, some with judgment. My reputation in the community had been fractured, but I had something they didn't, my voice. My story. And a path forward. That night, at home alone in my apartment, I sat staring at the family photo on the mantel, the same one from my childhood. It used to be a symbol of warmth and stability. Now it was a reminder of what I had survived. I ran my fingers over the frame, feeling the weight of the years of manipulation, fear, and betrayal. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel powerless. The storm wasn't over, but I had taken my first step out of it. And I knew one thing, I wouldn't stop until I rebuilt my life from the ruins they left behind. The weeks after graduation were a blur of legal battles, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. Even after publicly exposing Sarah and her criminal network, the damage to my life was far from over. My insomnia worsened. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart pound as if my chest were drum echoing every betrayal I had endured. Panic attacks came without warning. At the grocery store, I'd freeze in the aisle with cans of soup in my hand, imagining cameras hidden on the ceiling, on the bus. Every passenger's glance felt like judgment. Even at home, the shadow of being watched lingered. The community's reaction was brutal. My father had cut ties, claiming I exaggerated everything. Neighbours whispered as I walked past, and one morning, a stranger on the street called me a criminal, referencing the very news coverage that Sarah had orchestrated to smear me. My reputation, painstakingly built over years, had crumbled in a week. Even my workplace refused to reinstate me, citing the pending investigations and the fear of liability. I retreated into isolation, barely speaking to anyone outside therapy. My apartment smelled faintly of leftover Chinese food from dinners I couldn't bring myself to eat, and I started avoiding friends, afraid they'd think I was unstable. Erin tried to check in, but I would shrug him off, retreating into the shadows of my trauma. My therapy sessions were grueling. Dr. Hamilton, my psychologist, pushed me to confront the abuse, the blackmail, the betrayal. "Joshua," she said one afternoon, You've been living as if every corner of your life is unsafe. That type of vigilance saved you, but now it's keeping you trapped. I nodded, swallowing hard. I can't sleep. I can't trust anyone, even Aaron, even Kenneth. That's PTSD talking, she said gently. Your nervous system is still wired to survive our manipulations, but the truth is, your body is reacting to threats that aren't present anymore. You have to retrain your mind. Some nights, I would lie awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, imagining Sarah's voice whispering from the corners of my apartment. My chest tightened, hands trembling, unable to breathe. Other nights, I'd wake screaming from nightmares of cameras, emails, and threats, drenched in sweat. Physical toll was real: weight loss, stomach problems, migraines, constant exhaustion. Even the family lawyer's betrayal haunted me. Robert had leaked my therapy sessions to Sarah, trying to manipulate me into silence. I felt like the walls of trust had collapsed entirely, leaving me vulnerable to anyone who might claim authority over my life. The financial fallout was equally devastating. My $15,000 wedding fund was gone, stolen in the initial cyber attacks. Even with legal action underway, the recovery was slow and uncertain. Those piled up, and I had to move into a smaller apartment, leaving behind a home I had started to feel safe in. At my lowest point, I considered giving up entirely. Walking down the street, seeing the whispers, hearing the snickers, I felt like a walking ghost. People I had trusted for decades, family, colleagues, even some friends had abandoned me or turned against me. I felt invisible, and yet hyper-visible at the same time, exposed and humiliated. It was Aaron who finally broke through the fog. One rainy evening, he knocked on my door, holding 2 steaming bowls of leftover Chinese food. I almost refused him, but the smell familiar, grounding made something click inside me. We sat on the floor, eating in silence, letting the sound of rain cover our words. You can't let her win, Darsh, he said quietly. You've already survived the worst. Now it's time to start rebuilding, not for them, but for you. That night, something shifted. For the first time since the threats began, I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond fear and isolation. I realized I couldn't undo the past, but I could reclaim my future. I started small. I returned phone calls, reconnected with a few friends who hadn't abandoned me, and worked with Dr. Hamilton on trauma-informed coping strategies, grounding exercises, sleep hygiene routines, journaling, and gradual exposure to the things I feared most. I began documenting everything, creating a timeline of abuse and betrayal that would later become a foundation for my destiny. Even the nightmares became tools. I learned to visualize control in them, writing the scenes in my mind until I could sleep without fear. Panic attacks didn't vanish overnight, but I developed strategies to ride them out, breathe through them, and remind myself that I was safe finally, truly safe. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, I felt the possibility of hope. The storm hadn't ended, but I was no longer powerless. I was learning to fight back, not with rage, but with clarity, strategy, and patience. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning of reclaiming my life. Recovery didn't come quickly, and it didn't come neatly. The months after hitting rock bottom were a careful, exhausting process of rebuilding both my mind and my life. I started therapy 3 times a week, working with Dr. Hamilton on trauma processing, cognitive behavioral therapy, and grounding exercises. I journaled every night, documenting nightmares, panic attacks, and intrusive thoughts, tracking my triggers and learning to regain control. Every small victory, sleeping through the night, stepping into a crowded store without freezing, standing my ground in conversation, felt monumental. Aaron remained my lifeline. He helped me move into a safer apartment, drove me to appointments, and reminded me constantly that my trauma didn't define me. Kenneth, despite everything, slowly began to reach out, offering small gestures of trust, texts, phone calls, sometimes showing up with leftover Chinese food, a tradition that became oddly comforting in our broken lives. I realized trust had been fractured, but it could be rebuilt carefully, deliberately. One of the hardest parts was reclaiming my professional identity. My career had been sabotaged, my reputation smeared. I couldn't simply go back to the same job. So, I decided to turn my experience into a tool for helping others. I returned to school, enrolling in a counseling program focused on trauma and PTSD. At first, the thought of interacting with people felt terrifying. What if I fail? What if someone saw the vulnerability I had been forced to hide? But every class, every lecture, every session with the professor slowly reminded me of my strength and resilience. I was transforming pain into purpose. During this time, I also worked closely with law enforcement and cybersecurity experts to dismantle the network Sarah had been part of. It was painstaking and slow, involving forensic investigations, court hearings, and testimonies from both Kenneth and Aaron. The legal process reaffirmed what I had learned through trauma, documentation, evidence, and persistence were power. I began to reclaim my social life, cautiously at first. Small gatherings with trustworthy friends became safe spaces to laugh, vent, and simply exist without fear. I'd even reconnected with some extended family members who had been too intimidated by Sarah's manipulation to intervene. Social interactions were no longer tear zones, they were steps toward normalcy. Sleep, once the enemy, slowly became restorative. Dr. Hamilton taught me grounding exercises, feeling my feet on the floor, identifying objects in the room, listening to ambient sounds. I practiced these nightly, transforming my apartment into a sanctuary rather than a surveillance trap. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely, but I learned to face them, to remind myself that I was safe, and to reclaim control of my mind. Financial stability returned gradually. The stolen $15,000 wedding fund was partially recovered, and I started a side counseling practice while finishing school. I learned budgeting anew, navigating life with deliberate attention to safety and autonomy. It was empowering to reclaim control over something Sarah had weaponized against me. The turning point came on the day I graduated from my counseling program. Standing in the auditorium, diploma in hand, I reflected on the journey. The same determination that had carried me through the chaos, the betrayals, and the panic attacks had led me here. I could finally use my experience to empower others rather than be haunted by it. I started seeing clients, first survivors of trauma, then anyone struggling with manipulation, identity theft, or abusive relationships. I found purpose in listening, in validating experiences, and in providing tools I had learned the hard way. My past, once a source of shame and terror, became a bridge to empathy and strength. Today, I live in a modest apartment that smells faintly of leftover Chinese food, the mantle now holding a new family photo of me, Erin, and Kenneth, smiling genuinely, free of manipulation. The past is still part of me, but it doesn't control me. I sleep, I laugh, I teach, and I help others navigate darkness. My PTSD is a shadow I carry, but one I can now face with awareness and resilience. The lesson I want people to take from my story is simple, but powerful. Betrayal can fracture a life, but it doesn't have to define it. Even when your family, your friends, and your environment turn against you, survival is possible. Healing is messy, non-linear, and painful, but reclaiming your agency, your voice, and your life is worth every step. I'm Joshua. I survived manipulation, blackmail, identity theft, and psychological torture. I lost career, friends, and home, but I found strength, purpose, and a way to help others rebuild their lives. And in the end, I realized that even after the deepest betrayal, life can be rebuilt not the same, perhaps, but stronger and wiser than